Bright neon lights flicker across a Las Vegas casino floor, rows of slot machines humming as reels spin endlessly. Tourists cheer over small wins, oblivious to the fact that one machine, identical to hundreds of others, is being quietly manipulated by someone who isn't supposed to be there. He's not a mobster or a casino insider. He's a 34-year-old unemployed engineer named Daniel Ross, and over the next 5 years, he will siphon $55 million from casinos around the world, all without ever touching a weapon or breaking a lock. This is the story of how a broke engineer used his insider knowledge to exploit a vulnerability he'd helped create, building a global criminal network that brought the casino industry to its knees. Before we get into it, don't forget to like and subscribe, and hit hype to boost this episode. Drop a comment below with your city or country. I'm always curious where viewers are joining from. Daniel Ross sat in his studio apartment in Reno, Nevada, staring at the eviction notice taped to his door. It was March 2014, and he was 3 months behind on rent. His bank account held $217. His credit cards were maxed out. His car had been repossessed 2 weeks earlier. At 34 years old, with a master's degree in electrical engineering from Stanford, he was completely broke. 5 years earlier, Daniel's life had looked completely different. He'd been a senior hardware engineer at Silver State Gaming Systems, one of the largest slot machine manufacturers in the country. His job was designing and testing the circuit boards and firmware that powered thousands of slot machines across North America. He made $85,000 a year, had stock options, and was considered one of the brightest minds in gaming technology. The work was fascinating. Slot machines seemed simple to casual observers, just spinning reels and random outcomes. But the technology behind them was incredibly sophisticated. Every machine ran on complex random number generators, cryptographic security protocols, and tamper-resistant hardware designed to prevent exactly the kind of exploitation Daniel would later pioneer. Daniel had spent years understanding these systems at the deepest level. He knew how the RNG algorithms worked, how they generated thousands of numbers per second even when no one was playing, how the machines determined wins and losses, and most importantly, where the vulnerabilities existed in older models still in circulation. But in 2011, the recession hit the gaming industry hard. Casinos reduced their orders for new machines. Manufacturers laid off workers. Silver State Gaming cut 20% of its workforce, and Daniel was among them. Despite his talent and experience, he was let go in a mass layoff that eliminated his entire division. He spent 6 months searching for another engineering job. He applied to every gaming company in Nevada, then expanded his search nationwide. But the industry was contracting. No one was hiring senior engineers with specialized gambling technology experience. The skills that had made him valuable at Silver State were too niche for other industries. Desperate to stay afloat, Daniel burned through his savings while trying to launch a startup. He developed a prototype for a new type of gaming terminal with enhanced security features. He pitched it to investors, demonstrated the technology at industry conferences, and worked 16-hour days trying to make it viable. But he couldn't secure funding. The market was saturated, and investors were risk-averse after the financial crisis. By early 2013, Daniel's startup had failed completely. He drained his retirement accounts, borrowed money from friends and family, and accumulated $60,000 in credit card debt. He took contract work when he could find it, repairing electronics and doing freelance circuit board design for small manufacturers. But the income was sporadic and insufficient. He moved from his 2-bedroom apartment to a studio. He sold his furniture. He stopped going out, stopped dating, stopped doing anything that cost money. His entire existence became a grinding struggle to avoid complete financial collapse. Daniel grew bitter. He'd done everything right. He'd studied hard, earned advanced degrees from prestigious universities, and worked diligently at a legitimate company. He'd played by the rules, and the system had discarded him anyway, leaving him broke and desperate, while the casinos that used his technology made billions. Late at night, unable to sleep, Daniel would think about all those slot machines he'd helped design. Thousands of them, running in casinos across the country, generating profits for corporations that had laid him off. He knew those machines better than almost anyone alive. He understood their vulnerabilities, their weaknesses, the small flaws in their security systems. And he started wondering if that knowledge could save him. In February 2014, a small electronics repair shop hired Daniel for a freelance project. They'd acquired several old circuit boards from a bankrupt arcade and wanted him to reverse engineer them to salvage components. The pay was minimal, just $300, but Daniel needed every cent. One of the circuit boards came from an older model slot machine, a unit manufactured around 2008. Daniel recognized it immediately. It was from Silver State Gaming's Legacy line, a model he'd worked on during his early years at the company. Thousands of these machines were still in operation at smaller casinos and tribal gaming facilities that couldn't afford to upgrade to newer equipment. As Daniel examined the board, memories flooded back. He'd been part of the team that designed this machine's random number generator. He remembered the meetings, the specifications, the compromises they'd made to meet budget constraints and production deadlines. And he remembered something else, something he'd noticed years ago but never reported because it seemed irrelevant at the time. The RNG algorithm had a flaw, not a catastrophic vulnerability, but a subtle predictability in how it generated numbers under specific conditions. The flaw existed because the algorithm used a pseudo-random number generator, which wasn't truly random but rather a mathematical formula that produced sequences of numbers that appeared random. With the right inputs and timing, someone could predict the next number in the sequence. Daniel had mentioned this issue to his supervisor back in 2009, but the supervisor had dismissed it. The flaw only manifested under very specific timing conditions that were unlikely to occur during normal play. Fixing it would have required redesigning the entire RNG module, which would have been expensive and time-consuming. Since the vulnerability seemed impractical to exploit, management decided the risk was acceptable. But sitting in that repair shop with the circuit board in his hands, Daniel realized something his supervisor hadn't considered. If someone knew exactly when those specific conditions occurred, if they could time their play to the millisecond, they could exploit the flaw to predict when jackpots would hit. Daniel spent the next week analyzing the circuit board in his apartment. He mapped out the RNG algorithm, documented its timing cycles, and calculated the exact conditions under which the flaw became exploitable. Then he built a computer simulation to test his theory. The simulation confirmed what he suspected. Under normal circumstances, the RNG appeared completely random. But if someone could monitor the machine's internal state and trigger spins at precise moments, they could dramatically increase their odds of hitting winning combinations. Not every time, but often enough to guarantee long-term profits. The key was timing. The RNG cycled through its number sequence at incredible speed, generating hundreds of values per second. But the cycle wasn't perfectly random. It had a pattern, a mathematical structure that repeated predictably. If you could sync with that pattern and trigger spins at exactly the right millisecond, you could hit jackpots with alarming frequency. Daniel's mind raced with possibilities. He knew which casinos still used these older machines. He knew how many of them were in operation. He could calculate the potential earnings if someone successfully exploited the flaw. The numbers were staggering. Hundreds of vulnerable machines across dozens of casinos, each machine capable of generating thousands of dollars in exploited payouts before anyone noticed. The total potential take could reach tens of millions, but exploiting the flaw required specialized equipment. Someone would need a device that could monitor the machine's internal timing, calculate the optimal moment to spin, and signal the user without being detected by casino surveillance. Building such a device would require significant technical expertise. Fortunately, Daniel had exactly that expertise. He spent 2 weeks designing a handheld device that could sync with the slot machine's RNG. The device looked like an ordinary smartphone, but it contained custom hardware and software that could detect the electromagnetic signals emitted by the slot machine's circuit board. By monitoring these signals, the device could track the RNG's internal state and calculate the optimal moment to trigger a spin. The device would vibrate when conditions were perfect. The user would feel the vibration, press the spin button, and hit a winning combination. To casino surveillance, it would look like random luck. Just another player pressing buttons and getting fortunate. Daniel built the first prototype using components he'd salvaged from his failed startup and parts he ordered online. The total cost was about $400, money he could barely afford to spend. But he was desperate. This device represented his only chance to escape the financial hole he'd fallen into. The question was whether he had the courage to actually use it. Daniel drove to Arizona in April 2014 with his prototype device and $800 in cash, nearly everything he had left. He chose the Desert Sun Casino, a small tribal facility about 3 hours from Reno. The casino was far enough from home that no one would recognize him, but close enough to reach in a day. He'd researched the casino online and confirmed they had at least a dozen older model slot machines from Silver State Gaming's legacy line. Perfect targets. Daniel arrived on a Tuesday afternoon when the casino was relatively empty. He wore jeans and a plain t-shirt, dressed like any other casual gambler. The device was in his pocket, disguised as a phone. To any observer, he looked like a broke tourist trying his luck. He walked the casino floor, casually examining machines until he found one of the vulnerable models. It was a $5 slot machine in a corner, away from the main traffic areas. Daniel sat down, his heart pounding so hard he worried people could hear it. He fed a $20 bill into the machine and started playing. The device in his pocket was active, monitoring the electromagnetic signals from the machine's circuit board. Daniel placed minimum bets and watched the reel spin, waiting for the device to detect the right conditions. After 15 minutes and $40 in losses, the device vibrated against his leg. Daniel pressed the spin button. The reels aligned perfectly. 3 jackpot symbols in a row. The machine erupted in lights and sounds. The display showed a payout of $12,000. Daniel sat frozen, barely breathing. It had worked. His theory, his calculations, his device had actually worked. An attendant came over to verify the win and process the payout. Daniel forced himself to act surprised and excited, like any lucky player would. The attendant checked the machine, confirmed the win was legitimate, and arranged for the payout. Casino procedure required a form for tax reporting on wins over $1,200, so Daniel provided his real information. He had no choice. 30 minutes later, Daniel walked out of the casino with $12,000 in cash minus the federal withholding. His hands shook as he drove back to Reno. He just committed what was probably a crime, though he wasn't entirely sure of the legal status of what he'd done. He hadn't tampered with the machine. He hadn't hacked into any computer system. He'd simply timed his play using knowledge he'd gained legitimately during his employment. But he knew the casinos wouldn't see it that way. Daniel returned to the Desert Sun Casino 2 weeks later. This time he hit 3 separate machines for smaller jackpots, $9,000, $7,000, and $11,000. He walked out with $27,000 in total winnings. He went back a month later and won another $18,000 across 4 machines. By June 2014, Daniel had accumulated $68,000 in winnings from the Desert Sun alone. He'd paid off his back rent, settled some credit card debt, and bought a used car. For the first time in 2 years, he could breathe. But he knew he couldn't keep hitting the same casino. Eventually, someone would notice the pattern. He needed to expand his operation, spread the wins across multiple locations, and keep each individual take small enough to avoid triggering serious scrutiny. The problem was scale. One person could only visit so many casinos. If Daniel wanted to maximize his profits while minimizing his risk, he needed help. He needed a team. Daniel's first recruit was Marcus Webb, a former co-worker from Silver State Gaming who'd also been laid off in 2011. Marcus was 42, divorced, and working as a restaurant manager for barely above minimum wage. When Daniel reached out in July 2014 and explained the opportunity, Marcus listened carefully. Daniel was honest about the risks. What they were planning was legally ambiguous at best, probably criminal at worst. But the money was real, and the technique worked. He'd proven it over 3 months of successful operations. Marcus thought about it for 2 days before agreeing. He needed the money too badly to refuse. Daniel built a second device and trained Marcus on how to use it. They established strict protocols. Never hit the same casino more than once every 6 weeks. Never take more than $30,000 from a single location in one visit. Never communicate inside casinos. Keep wins below $12,000 when possible to avoid tax reporting requirements. Marcus made his first run to a tribal casino in California in August 2014. He came back with $19,000. He went to Nevada the next week and won $23,000. By September, Marcus had cleared $70,000, and Daniel had taken his cut as the device provider and operation manager. The operation was working, but Daniel wanted more. Over the next year, he recruited 6 more people. Some were former colleagues from the gaming industry. Others were professional gamblers he'd met in casinos who understood how to blend in and avoid suspicion. One was a former slot machine technician who'd been fired for alcohol problems and was desperate for income. Daniel trained each recruit personally. He explained the technology, demonstrated the device, and drilled them on operational security. He created detailed target lists identifying which casinos had vulnerable machines. He established a rotation schedule so no casino got hit too frequently by the same person. Most importantly, he implemented a strict payment structure. Each team member kept 60% of their winnings and gave 40% to Daniel. In exchange, Daniel provided the devices, selected the targets, and managed the overall operation. He also kept the offshore accounts where they funneled their profits to avoid attention from tax authorities. By early 2016, Daniel's network had 8 active members operating across 7 states. They were pulling in a combined $200,000 to $300,000 per month. Daniel's personal take was roughly $100,000 monthly, more money than he'd ever made as an engineer. He moved into a nice apartment in Reno. He bought a new car, a BMW that felt like a statement about his recovery from rock bottom. He paid off all his debts and started investing in stocks and cryptocurrency. He told friends and family that his consulting business was finally taking off, that he'd landed several major clients. No one suspected what he was really doing. The operation grew more sophisticated. Daniel developed improved versions of his device with better signal detection and more accurate timing calculations. He created a secure communication system using encrypted messaging apps. He established protocols for dealing with casino security if anyone got questioned, and he started thinking bigger. If these older machines were vulnerable in the United States, they were probably vulnerable everywhere. Silver State Gaming had exported thousands of machines internationally over the years. Those same flawed units were operating in casinos from Europe to Asia. Daniel began researching international targets. In March 2016, Daniel sent his first team member to Monaco. James Chen, a naturalized U.S. citizen originally from Taiwan, spoke Mandarin and enough French to get by. He'd been working with Daniel's network for 6 months and had proven himself reliable and cautious. James found 2 casinos in Monaco with vulnerable Silver State machines. He hit them over a week, winning 68,000 euros across multiple sessions. Casino security never questioned him. To them, he was just another wealthy Asian tourist gambling in Monte Carlo. The success encouraged Daniel to expand further. He researched casinos in Macau, the gambling capital of Asia, where Silver State Gaming had sold hundreds of machines in the late 2000s. He sent 2 team members there in April 2016. They came back with $140,000 in combined winnings. Over the next 2 years, Daniel's operation went global. His team hit casinos in Singapore, Malaysia, the Philippines, South Africa, and multiple European countries. Each location offered fresh targets, machines that hadn't been flagged by U.S. casino security systems. The international expansion dramatically increased their profits. By mid-2017, the network was generating close to $1 million per month. Daniel personally cleared $300,000 to $400,000 monthly. He bought a house in Reno's nicest neighborhood. He invested heavily in cryptocurrency during the 2017 boom, multiplying his wealth even further. He'd gone from broke and desperate to wealthy beyond his dreams in just 3 years. The bitter, unemployed engineer living in a studio apartment was gone, replaced by a successful businessman with assets in multiple countries. But the scale of the operation was creating problems. More wins meant more attention. Casino security teams across multiple continents were starting to notice patterns. Jackpots were hitting with unusual frequency on specific machine models. The wins weren't large enough individually to trigger alarm, but collectively they represented millions in losses. Gaming commissions began investigating. They reviewed footage, analyzed betting patterns, and interviewed winners. They found nothing obviously suspicious. The players appeared legitimate. The machines functioned normally. There was no evidence of tampering or collusion with casino staff, but the statistical anomalies were undeniable. These older Silver State machines were paying out at rates that shouldn't be possible given their programmed odds. In August 2017, the Nevada Gaming Commission reached out to Silver State Gaming Systems with concerns about their legacy model machines. The company sent engineers to examine units at several casinos. They ran diagnostics, checked the RNG algorithms, and tested the machines extensively. They found no obvious problems. The machines were functioning as designed. But the engineers did notice something interesting. The electromagnetic signature from these older models was stronger than newer machines, a quirk of the legacy circuit board design. In theory, someone with sophisticated equipment could potentially monitor those signals. Silver State Gaming issued a technical bulletin to casinos, recommending they upgrade to newer models with better electromagnetic shielding. But the bulletin was advisory, not mandatory. Many smaller casinos ignored it. The machines were working fine as far as they could tell. Why spend money on upgrades? Daniel saw the bulletin through his industry contacts. He knew it meant regulatory scrutiny was increasing, but he also knew that casinos weren't taking decisive action. He decided to push the operation harder while the window remained open. That decision would prove to be a fatal mistake. FBI Special Agent Sarah Martinez first heard about the slot machine case in November 2017. She worked in the Bureau's Financial Crimes Unit in Las Vegas, focusing on casino fraud and money laundering operations. A contact at the Nevada Gaming Commission called her about an unusual pattern they detected. Multiple casinos were reporting elevated payout rates on specific slot machine models. The pattern had been ongoing for several years, but had recently intensified. Gaming Commission investigators suspected organized exploitation, but couldn't identify the method or the perpetrators. Sarah reviewed the data they'd compiled. The statistical analysis was compelling. The affected machines were paying jackpots at rates 3 to 4 times higher than their programmed odds. The wins were distributed across dozens of casinos in multiple states, but they all involved the same equipment manufacturer and model line. She started building a timeline. The elevated payouts had begun in mid-2014 and had increased steadily since then. The pattern had recently expanded internationally, with similar anomalies reported by gaming regulators in Monaco, Macau, and Singapore. Sarah pulled financial records for everyone who'd won significant jackpots on the affected machines over the past 3 years. She found hundreds of names, but certain individuals appeared repeatedly. These repeat winners had hit jackpots at multiple casinos across wide geographic areas. She started with Marcus Webb, who'd won jackpots at 14 different casinos across 6 states between 2014 and 2017. His financial records showed a restaurant manager making $38,000 a year, who'd somehow accumulated nearly $1 million in gambling winnings. Sarah obtained surveillance footage from several casinos where Marcus had won. She watched hours of video looking for anything suspicious. Marcus played normally, betting small amounts and hitting occasional jackpots. Nothing looked obviously wrong, but Sarah noticed something subtle. Before hitting each jackpot, Marcus would pause briefly and appear to check something, possibly his phone. The pause was barely noticeable, just a second or two, but it happened consistently right before winning spins. She reviewed footage of other repeat winners and saw the same pattern. A brief pause, often accompanied by reaching toward a pocket or looking down, immediately before a jackpot spin. Sarah hypothesized they were using some kind of signaling device. But what kind of device? And how did it work? She brought in FBI technical specialists to examine the slot machines. They discovered the electromagnetic signature issue that Silver State Gaming had noted in their bulletin. The specialists theorized that someone could potentially build a device to monitor those signals and predict the RNG cycle. But building such a device would require deep technical knowledge of slot machine architecture. Sarah started looking at former employees of Silver State Gaming, particularly engineers who'd left the company in the years before the pattern began. She found Daniel Ross in December 2017. Daniel's profile was perfect. Senior engineer laid off in 2011. Expert in RNG design for the exact machine models showing anomalies. Financial records showing a dramatic improvement in circumstances starting in 2014. Bank deposits and wire transfers totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars from 2014 to 2017, with no legitimate source of income to explain them. Sarah obtained warrants for Daniel's financial records, phone records, and communications. She found encrypted messaging conversations with multiple members of what appeared to be an organized team. The messages used code words, but the context made clear they were coordinating casino visits and discussing payouts. She identified 8 core members of the network and began surveillance on all of them. FBI agents followed Daniel and his team to casinos in Nevada, California, and Arizona. They documented the pattern. Team members would arrive at casinos, play the vulnerable machines, win jackpots with suspicious frequency, and leave. They never acknowledged each other inside the casinos, but they coordinated their visits carefully. In February 2018, Sarah had enough evidence to brief her supervisors. She estimated the network had stolen between $40 and $50 million over 4 years. The operation was sophisticated, organized, and ongoing. She requested authorization for raids and arrests. The FBI and Nevada Gaming Commission coordinated a major enforcement operation. They would simultaneously raid Daniel's residence and the homes of his key team members, seizing devices, computers, and financial records. They would arrest everyone involved and shut down the entire network. The raids were scheduled for March 15, 2018, but Daniel had been monitoring the news and industry communications. He'd seen articles about increased regulatory scrutiny of older slot machines. He'd heard through his network that FBI agents had been asking questions at several casinos. The walls were closing in. On March 10, 2018, Daniel made a decision. He was going to run. Daniel spent 3 days preparing to flee. He liquidated his cryptocurrency holdings, converting millions of dollars into cash and storing the physical currency in duffel bags. He closed his U.S. bank accounts and transferred funds to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. He destroyed his computers and phones, smashing the hard drives and dumping the pieces in a lake outside Reno. He sent encrypted messages to his team members, warning them that law enforcement was closing in. He told them to stop operations immediately, destroy their devices, and prepare for possible prosecution. Some members panicked. Others went dark, cutting all communication. Daniel's plan was to drive to San Diego and cross into Mexico at Tijuana. From there, he'd fly to a country without an extradition treaty with the United States. He'd researched options and decided on either Panama or Paraguay, both of which had banking systems friendly to wealthy foreigners and relatively lax enforcement of international warrants. He packed everything he could carry into his BMW. The duffel bags full of cash, totaling about $2.4 million. Cryptocurrency wallet information written on paper. Fake identification documents he'd purchased from a forger, and clothes and supplies for the trip. He left Reno at 3 a.m. on March 13, 2018, driving south toward California. He'd planned the route carefully, avoiding major highways where he might encounter Border Patrol checkpoints or police looking for him. What Daniel didn't know was that the FBI had been monitoring his communications since December. They'd seen his warning messages to team members. They knew he was preparing to flee. Sarah Martinez had pushed her supervisors to move the raids up by 2 days. She'd obtained emergency warrants and coordinated with Border Patrol and California Highway Patrol to watch for Daniel's vehicle. An agent spotted Daniel's BMW on Interstate 15 south of Barstow at 6 a.m. on March 13th. Highway Patrol followed him at a distance, waiting for FBI units to get into position. Daniel reached the San Isidro port of entry, the border crossing into Tijuana, at noon. He joined the line of vehicles waiting to cross, thinking he was minutes away from safety. FBI agents surrounded his car before he reached the crossing booth. 6 vehicles, 12 agents, all with weapons drawn. Daniel sat frozen in his driver's seat as agents approached from all sides. They pulled him from the car and handcuffed him on the pavement, while tourists and commuters watched from nearby vehicles. Agents searched the BMW and found the duffel bags full of cash, the cryptocurrency information, and the fake identification. Daniel said nothing. He asked for a lawyer and refused to answer any questions. FBI agents raided his house in Reno simultaneously and found the workshop where he'd built the devices. They recovered partially assembled units, technical diagrams, and testing equipment. They seized computers that Daniel had forgotten to destroy, including laptops containing customer lists, financial spreadsheets, and communication logs with team members. Over the next week, FBI agents arrested 6 other members of the network across 4 states. 2 members fled successfully and remain at large. 1 member, James Chen, was arrested in Taiwan at the request of U.S. authorities and later extradited. The indictments came down in April 2018. Daniel was charged with conspiracy to commit fraud, wire fraud, computer fraud, and money laundering. Prosecutors described his operation as the most sophisticated slot machine manipulation scheme in U.S. history. They estimated total losses to casinos at $55 million, though the actual figure was difficult to calculate precisely. Daniel's trial began in October 2018. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence: the devices, the communications, the financial records, testimony from team members who'd accepted plea deals, and expert analysis of the slot machine vulnerability he'd exploited. Daniel's defense attorney argued that what Daniel had done wasn't technically illegal. He hadn't tampered with the machines or hacked into computer systems. He'd simply used his knowledge and technical skills to time his play advantageously. It was sophisticated advantage play, not fraud. The jury didn't buy it. After 3 days of deliberation, they convicted Daniel on all counts. The judge sentenced him to 27 years in federal prison and ordered him to pay $32 million in restitution to the affected casinos. Daniel showed no emotion as the sentence was read. He was 38 years old. If he served his full sentence, he'd be 65 when he was released. The Daniel Ross case sent shockwaves through the casino industry. Within months, virtually every major casino in the world had audited their slot machine inventories and removed or replaced older Silver State gaming models. The company itself faced multiple lawsuits from casinos seeking compensation for their losses. Silver State Gaming responded by releasing a comprehensive firmware update for all remaining legacy machines, completely redesigning their RNG algorithm and adding additional security features. They also retrofitted older machines with electromagnetic shielding to prevent the kind of signal monitoring Daniel had used. The case led to significant changes in gaming regulations. Several states now require annual third-party security audits of all slot machines. International gaming authorities established better information sharing protocols to detect cross-border fraud schemes. Most of Daniel's team members received shorter sentences in exchange for cooperation. Marcus Webb got 6 years. James Chen got 8. 2 members who'd played minor roles received probation. The 2 members who successfully fled were never caught. One is believed to be living in South America. The other reportedly settled in Southeast Asia. Both remain on FBI wanted lists. Daniel Ross is currently serving his sentence at FCI Victorville in California. Prison records indicate he works in the facility's education department, teaching basic mathematics to other inmates. He's eligible for parole in 2038, though given the severity of his crimes and the amount of restitution owed, parole is considered unlikely. The FBI eventually recovered about $8 million in cash and assets from Daniel and his team members. The cryptocurrency holdings proved more difficult to seize. Daniel had stored some funds in wallets with complex security keys that he refused to disclose. Prosecutors believe he may still have access to millions of dollars hidden in cryptocurrency that authorities cannot access. Several journalists have requested interviews with Daniel in prison. He's declined all of them. The only public statement he's made since his arrest came during his sentencing hearing, when the judge asked if he had anything to say. Daniel stood and addressed the court. He said he understood he'd broken the law and would accept his punishment, but he wanted people to understand something. He hadn't set out to become a criminal. He'd been a legitimately employed engineer who'd been discarded by the same industry he'd helped build. The casinos made billions from the technology he'd created, while he'd been left broke and desperate. He'd found a flaw in the system, he said, not by accident, but because he understood the system better than the people running it. The casinos had gotten lazy and complacent, running outdated equipment because upgrading was expensive. They'd ignored security bulletins and warnings because profits were more important than protection. Daniel looked directly at the casino executives sitting in the courtroom gallery. He told them they hadn't been robbed by a criminal mastermind. They'd been beaten by their own negligence and greed. Then he sat down. The judge proceeded with sentencing. 5 years after his arrest, in March 2023, a journalist managed to get a brief written correspondence with Daniel through the prison's email system. The journalist asked Daniel if he regretted what he'd done, knowing it had cost him everything. Daniel's response was surprisingly candid. He wrote that he didn't regret exposing the flaw. The casinos had been running vulnerable machines for years, ignoring warnings and security recommendations, because upgrading was expensive. Someone was eventually going to exploit that vulnerability. It just happened to be him. What he regretted, he wrote, was getting greedy. He could have stopped after the first year with a few $1 million and disappeared. He could have retired quietly to a country without extradition and lived comfortably forever. But he'd kept pushing, kept expanding, kept taking more. The mathematics of the exploit had been perfect. His execution had been flawless. But he'd forgotten that every system has its breaking point, including criminal enterprises. He'd violated the fundamental rule of any successful fraud: quit while you're ahead. But then Daniel wrote something that surprised the journalist. He said that in a strange way, he didn't consider his life wasted. He'd gone from being broke and invisible to being someone who'd beaten the casinos at their own game. He'd built something technically brilliant and executed it at a global scale. He'd shown that no system was truly unbeatable. Yes, he was in prison. Yes, he'd lost his freedom and his future. But for 5 years, he'd been exceptional. He'd been the smartest person in every room he'd entered. He'd solved a problem that casino security teams and gaming commissions couldn't figure out. That meant something, he wrote. Maybe not to the judge or the FBI or the casinos, but to him it meant everything. The journalist asked one final question. If Daniel could go back to March 2014, to that moment in his apartment when he first discovered the flaw, would he make the same choice? Daniel's response arrived 3 weeks later. It was brief, just 2 sentences. I found a crack in an unbreakable system and I walked through it. Most people never get that chance. The journalist published Daniel's responses in a long-form article about the case. The piece generated significant discussion about casino security, the desperation of unemployed workers, and the ethics of exploiting system vulnerabilities. But the detail that stuck with readers was simpler and more human. Daniel Ross, sitting in federal prison with 20 years left on his sentence and millions in unpayable restitution, didn't regret anything. He'd been broke and invisible, and he'd chosen to become notorious and brilliant instead. Prison was the price, and he'd decided that price was worth paying. The casinos had won in the end, like they always do. But for 5 extraordinary years, Daniel Ross had made them wonder if they'd ever really been in control at all. And in his cell at FCI Victorville, teaching basic math to inmates who'd never graduate high school, Daniel Ross sometimes smiled when he thought about those slot machines spinning in perfect mathematical rhythm, paying jackpots to a broke engineer who'd figured out their secret. The house always wins, they say, but Daniel Ross had proven that sometimes, just sometimes, the house had to work for it.